What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to look into some VFX tricks that are used in a lot of shoe product videos, such as these Nike commercials, whether they're official or unofficial. It doesn't really matter. Essentially, I just want to teach you some of these cool tricks, how you can create a product ad video such as this. Again, we're going to be focusing on just some VFX tricks that you can do within After Effects, as well as some cool 3D things. So anyways, let's get right into it. If you guys are new here, consider subscribing, slap a like on the video if you do enjoy, comment what you would like to see next. This video is sort of a precursor for this augmented reality clothing tutorial series that I want to put out soon. So if you'd like to see that, leave a like on the video, let me know. So step number one for creating your shoe commercial. You have two options here. Either A, you can shoot the commercial yourself. If you just browse YouTube, you're going to find tons of different tutorials for people shooting product style videos. Or alternatively, you can do what I did and take a 3D scan of the product you're trying to add VFX to. This is actually very easy. I did it all with my phone. I literally just went on the App Store, found a 3D scanning app. Pretty sure the one I used was called Polycam, but of course there are other alternates out there. For this one in particular, you can take 5 scans for free. If you want to export your 3D file, you're going to need to purchase the Pro version, which is $7 a month. If you don't want to use the app that I did, there's actually free methods such as using something like Meshroom, or you can use a software like Reality Capture where you pay per output. So I'll leave links to each of those 3 options below. All I did was take my shoe, place it on a cup so I can get a little bit more of that underneath angle. And then I just took a bunch of pictures of the side of the shoe. Again, I didn't use a turntable. I didn't shoot this in a very professional manner. I just took the shoe, flipped it around, took some more pictures, and then flipped it on its side and took pictures of the bottom. Once you take a bunch of these pictures, you just click upload and it'll process your 3D image in the app. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect. We're actually going to go into Blender, which is free, and just easily clean this up. So once you have your 3D scan in the app, you just click export and you export it as an OBJ. I chose just to email myself the OBJ file. So now that I have that OBJ file of my 3D shoe, what I did was open it up in Blender, which is a free 3D software. Just went up to File, Import, and imported in the OBJ that I emailed myself from the app. So once you've imported it, switch over to your rendered view by clicking in the top right, and you can see how the texture is automatically applied. Now, if you have any issues with the texture, for example, any discoloration, what you could always do is just open up the texture files within Photoshop. So if I select the shoe and I just go to the material properties right here, you're going to see where the image file for the shoe is located. And this is what it should look like once you do email it to yourself. Here's the shoe model, and then here's the different textures. This is actually what it looked like originally. I just opened this up into Photoshop and I made a couple of adjustments just to remove the green. If you do make those fixes within Photoshop, once you've saved that file, select it again in Blender, go to your material properties and open up the fix file from Photoshop. So here's what that looks like. So what's the point of having a 3D model of the shoe? There's so many benefits over having this 3D model as opposed to just a picture. There's so many different tools that exist within a 3D software that you can now apply to the 3D model. So in my earlier example here, you can see how they had this sort of simulation of just this plane with a metallic material over top of it. It's easy to be able to do something like that within Cinema 4D or Blender just by creating that metallic shader, applying a simulation tag like cloth to the plane and a cloth collider to the shoe, changing around some of the parameters and getting a cool simulation like this. You can also see how they did something like this in the second example here, where they had this sort of plastic wrap. You can see some of the cool shots they were able to accomplish with that. So that's why I'd recommend 3D scanning, using 3D as a tool for this. Again, this is just one example. We're going to talk about 5. If you do choose the 3D route, there's so many different tutorials that allow you to build on what I'm talking about here. For example, this is a tutorial showing you how to add interactive squish to your 3D shoe models. We're not going to get into the ins and outs because, again, like I mentioned, there's so many different tutorials out there that let you build on that look once you have the 3D model. So that's my first tip, 3D scanning your product. All right, guys, so now that we've covered step 1, which is to choose either to shoot the footage of your product or to create the 3D render. In my case, I talked about using that 3D scanning app and then just cleaning it up to create some different scenes of a shoe. So here, again, I just added a little bit of spin, rendered it out. So once you have your footage or your 3D render, we're going to talk about distortion effects. So what I like to do to add distortion to something like this, one cool effect is CC scale wipe within After Effects. If If you just drop that on your clip and then in your effect controls, you can take the stretch value and just crank that up. You see how it's affecting only the shoe? That's because this is actually transparent behind the shoe, since I did create that 3D render. If you guys did shoot the footage yourself, then what you could easily do is just shoot it in front of a green screen, add a little key light effect to remove the green, and you'll be right where I am, where you just have this floating shoe with the transparency. You can even keyframe it. So at the beginning of my timeline, I can keyframe the stretch, I can drag a bit, and then I can just crank that up. And you see how we can create some cool effects just by doing that. Now, other things, let's go ahead and hide the effects on that. If you want an all-in-one glitch plugin, I like using Glitchify by CinemaSpice. Again, I'm not sponsored to talk about this, but this is what I've personally been using, so I'll leave a link below to this. If you don't want all the crazy stuff, you can just go through and disable some of these or maybe reduce. So we'll maybe take off the color glitch. And for the image glitch, here's where you can control your pixel sorting. You see if I just bump that up, now we have these sort of streaks in here. So a great little tool here for your 3D shoes or your product placement, your music videos, whatever it is you guys are creating. I think that looks pretty cool with the pixel sorting and our channel glitch. So that covers some distortion effects that you can use for these product videos. We talked about your glitch. We talked about the CC scale wipe. Let's move on to the next part of this tutorial, using masking and rotoscoping to create cool shoe effects. Now here's the most basic example. You could do this in Adobe Premiere, where you literally just mask out an area, scale it up, maybe change the color, and do that to highlight a certain area. I'll show you quickly how to do that in After Effects, but again, of course, you could do this in pretty much any editing software. You just grab your pen tool, or if you want to put it in a shape like that diamond, you can even alt-click this shape tool until you have something you like. Draw this masked shape right here. Because this mask is on add here and everything else is being removed, we would select this layer and click Control D to duplicate it, and then just delete the mask off the bottom layer. Now you can't see anything right now, but if we select the top layer, which has our mask, and we say, for example, just click S and scale that up, you can see a little bit of what I'm talking about. And let's actually go back, and you see how our anchor point is over to the side. Let's just grab this button in the top left and move our anchor right in the center. That way, when we do click S and scale this, it should scale from the center position. So something like that. So easy way just to highlight an area. You can also go and add maybe like a brightness or contrast to that top layer. Let's go ahead and rename this to shape mask. And then in our effect controls, we can just add a little bit of variation so that this shape sort of stands out from whatever it's behind. And of course, you can maybe pop that up for a few frames. So click Control Shift D, just delete that, go a few frames, Control Shift D. So that way it'll just kind of pop up. And again, just to sort of control where the viewer is looking, you could even add something like HLS, drop that on here. And you can crank that value in your effect controls to sort of change the color of whatever is in the shape. So really, again, just using your simple masking to highlight different parts of the video. That's the most basic way to use masking for this. Now, another cool alternative, I actually made this video a while back where you can use pretty much the exact same steps that I was showing you, but use the freeze frames in an animation sense so that it sort of builds together this animation like this. I call that the freeze frame morph effect. So if you'd like to see how to do something like that, in this tutorial, I show you how to line everything up. And then again, just using easy masking tools, cutting together the clips within Adobe Premiere, and then adding some basic keyframes so you can get this cool deconstructing effect. Now that we talked about using basic masking, let's talk about how we can use rotoscoping, which is an After Effects tool, which allows us to mask a lot faster. Now here's an example of what you can do with rotoscoping, and I'm going to show you how we can do this ourselves from scratch, highlighting the shoes perfectly. And this was actually created by Cash Bunny, who's an awesome creator. I'll link her Instagram down below. So as you can see, literally just rotoscoping out the shape of the shoe, duplicating it, adding motion blur. So let me show you how we could do something like that. And I found this footage on pexels.com. It should be pretty easy to be able to rotoscope the shoes out in this sense. And of course, you don't have to do this on just shoes. You can apply the same technique to anything to duplicate the motion and really highlight it. So let's go ahead and just drag this footage into a new composition. And to be able to start rotoscoping this, what I'm going to do is just double click on it until we go from a composition to a layer. And then you can go in the top left and grab your roto brush tool. It should default as a green brush. If you hold down Alt, you have the red brush. You want to start with the green brush and just sort of highlight the general area, and then hold Alt and use the red brush to try and get this purple line around the shoe as best as you can. So that's the basics of using the roto brush tool. Once you do that, you click page down, and you want to just keep making any adjustments here so that the shoe is always selected. Pretty easy. And then again, you click page down and you just make any adjustment if needed. Alright guys, so some easy little adjustments. Once you've made all those for your specified area here, you just zoom into this gray bar. If you're using the latest version of After Effects, it should be a lot easier to see this, but you start the gray bar right here at this little square, and then you end the gray bar right where your cursor is, which should be at the last frame that you made an adjustment for. Once you've done that, you go ahead and just click this freeze button, and After Effects is going to go and isolate this area, which is our shoe. Then we'll add some easy little motion blur. So we'll switch back over to composition. And in this frame here, you should see we should just have a shoe. Pretty cool. If you guys need to, you can mess around with the settings here, shift edge, reduce chatter, etc. Now what we need is to duplicate this footage so that we can bring back the background. So select it and click Control D to duplicate it. And then on the bottom layer, we'll rename that to background. And then on the bottom layer as well, we're going to go ahead and just hide the roto brush tool. Great. So now what we can do is just add a tiny keyframe animation so that our shoe sort of slides out. So we're going to open up the transform options for our duplicate shoe layer, which should be over top. And at the starting position here, we're just going to click and activate all these keyframes. And then we'll just drag a bit and then take your position and just move that over to the left. So here's what that should look like. See how it just kind of floats out. And of course, if you guys want more variations of this, you can just select it, Control D. You can just take the position and move it over more. So something like this. Let's do that one more time. We'll click Control D. We'll open up the transform for that duplication. And then with our position selected, we'll just move that over more. All right, so now we have our little clones popping out here. Now this looks a little bit stiff, so we're gonna add some motion blur. What we're gonna do is just enable motion blur for the composition. Just click this little triple circle button right there, and then click toggle switches and modes until you're seeing the switches for the individual layers, and go ahead and just enable the motion blur switch for all of those. So we just have to click just like that, and instantly you can see the difference here, what the motion blur does. Just add some realistic speed and movement to that. And if it's a little bit too much or too little with the motion blur, you go to composition comp settings, and then in advanced, you guys can mess with the shutter angle here. What we can do is just take our first duplicate shoe here and duplicate it again. So Control D, and we're going to rename this to blocking shoe, and we'll drag this layer all the way above all the duplicated shoes, and then we'll just remove the keyframe. So it'll just hang over top. See all the keyframes for the movement, we'll just turn those all off. So that way there is a shoe on the very top that blocks everything else. That way it looks like they're cleanly swiveling out from behind our shoe. So pretty awesome if you ask me, just using simple After Effects rotoscoping, which over the past couple of After Effects iterations has improved a lot. So definitely recommend you use it. And of course, using After Effects built-in motion blur, which really sells this effect, as you can see, making that movement look a lot better. Repeat those steps for the other side or whatever other parts of the video you'd like to showcase. I want to talk a little bit about kaleidoscope effects, which you can do in a couple of clicks. I think it's just cool with the background and everything. So let's go ahead and create a new composition here. We'll name this Tut Kaleidoscope. Cool little effect here. If you just look up CC Kaleida, drop that on there, and you can see already the craziness that we are creating. Let's go ahead and just take the size and bump that up until it's sort of in its own space. And you guys can mess around with the little presets that are built in here. I think it's a really solid tool for creating some sort of a ad placement. It gives you some very quick motion graphic style moving backgrounds that you can use pretty easily. Another cool technique for working with the background or duplicating, adding motion graphics, whatever, is just turning your layer into a 3D layer just by clicking toggle switches and modes and enabling the 3D switch. And then we'll create a camera here. We'll just right click, new camera. I've made a couple of tutorials where we talked about creating looping tunnels or looping expressions, but essentially once you have this as a 3D layer and you have a camera, you can click C on your keyboard. You're able to transform this in 3D space. You see if I rotate, here's this 2D layer being transformed with this 3D camera. So you're able to take these layers and just kind of duplicate them. And then you could just click P on each of these layers. If I take this third value, this is actually the Z axis. You can just reduce that. So click P, just keep moving these back. Keep pulling that to the right to make these further back within 3D space. And then you can set your camera up with some keyframes. So we'll just go ahead and keyframe everything here. And you can ultimately just switch over to your zoom tool just by clicking C. You can zoom past this 3D tunnel of kaleidoscope shoes or 3D objects or whatever. You don't even have to have kaleidoscope if you don't want. Maybe you could just position them randomly in 3D space. And if we just move these over manually after removing the kaleidoscope, you can see a little bit of what I'm talking about. So it really gives you full control over what you're trying to do with your scene. Understanding how cameras work, understanding how you can manipulate and transform things in 3D space. Now, the last thing I like to talk about here in this video is mixing your 3D shoe scan with real life footage. All you have to do to set this up is right click on your footage, go to track and stabilize and track the camera. I'm going to be doing this in After Effects in Cinema 4D, but if you'd like to use Blender, which we talked about earlier for cleaning up the mesh, you can use the built-in tracking system in Blender and just load your footage into there. Once After Effects has tracked your scene, all you need to do is use this bullseye and right click and create a solid and camera in the area where you'd like to place your augmented reality 3D shoe. I'm going to go ahead and just rotate this plane. And if we press play, we should see this plane tracked into 3D space where we'd like to place our shoe. So now let's go up to File, Export, and max on Cinema 4D exporter. I'm going to name this Nike Track and save it. And then I could just open up that Cinema 4D file, which is nice because now we have this sort of dynamic link between After Effects and Cinema 4D. So once we've opened up that Cinema 4D file, you're going to see we have your track solid, which we set up in After Effects, the camera tracking, which we did also in After Effects, and then all the keyframes here in our timeline. If I zoom out and press play, you can see the motion I took when I was recording it with the camera here and all the keyframes. If I was to switch into camera view, this would be from the camera's perspective with the added motion. So now we just need to place the 3D shoe model over top of where this plane is to see it within our scene. So we're going to go to File, Merge Objects. I'm going to open up the shoe model that I cleaned up within Blender. We can pop off the camera here and sort of align this better. So here's what this looks like initially. Let's go ahead and File, Save. And then back in After Effects, we can drag that Cinema 4D file in as a layer. So I imported in my Cinema 4D project file. I'm going to go ahead and just drag that layer into my main comp. If I press play here, you can see my miniature 3D shoe, which is now tracked within the scene. All we really need to do is change the scaling of this so it doesn't just look like a tiny miniature next to my normal shoe. You're also going to notice here, we use the exact same shoe for this. I didn't use the alternate shoe, so they're going to be facing the same direction. We're going to invert the size of this to make it look like it's for the other foot. So back in C4D, let's take our shoe. We're going to go ahead and scale that up some more. I'm also going to select the shoe, go to coordinates here, and just make all of these scale values negative. So we'll just put a negative in front of there. And then we'll take the rotation and just fix it. And that way it should look like it's for the opposite foot. So let's File, Save, and then back in After Effects, this should automatically update. So starting to look a bit better. We just need to scale it up a good deal more. All right, so I think the lining and tracking of everything is looking okay. Let's go ahead and apply the texture, remove all the planes and everything else. So in After Effects, we can hide the track solid that's visible here. And then in Cinema 4D, we can do the same for the track solid here. Again, this is just a reference for where we put the shoe in the scene. So we'll just check that off. I'm going to go ahead and fire up Octane, which is the plugin I'm going to use to render this out, just because I like the look of it. So we'll fire that up. I'm going to go to Create, Shader, C4D Octane, and make a new material where I can plug in my textures for the shoe. We'll just drop that on the shoe. And then in this material, I'm just going to start loading in the image textures for the shoe that we already have saved. So I'll just load in some image textures, and then I'll find where those are all saved. So we have a diffuse, we have a normal, in Cinema 4D Octane settings, we'll change this to path tracing, lower the samples to something like 150, and then we'll check on alpha channel and remove keep environment. That way we have this transparent background. Because we're going low samples here, to offset that, we're going to go ahead and enable the camera imager denoiser. So just enable denoising in your settings, as well as we want to place an Octane camera tag on this camera so that we can apply some Octane settings. So go up to tags, Cinema 4D Octane, and Octane camera tag. And then with that tag selected, we just want to go to camera imager and check that on. Now we can have the AI denoiser. So go to settings, change the renderer to Octane. We can just check on alpha channel, choose where we'd like to save this, and then in the Octane renderer setting, I'm going to enable use denoise beauty pass. Because we shot this with a very cinema neutral color profile, we're gonna go over to the camera tag for Octane as well. For the response, I'm gonna change that to linear, and then we'll take the gamma and put that to around 2.6 to adjust it. Next, I'm gonna go to objects and add in an HDRI environment. And I'm gonna find an HDRI for free on polyhaven.com that is similar to the footage that I shot here. So outdoors, it's not gonna be perfect because we didn't capture an HDRI on spot, but it should make it a bit more realistic. Back in C4D, we'll load that HDRI in. Match this up better, I'm gonna go and load in a background, and then I created a simple Cinema 4D Octane material just by going to create shader material, and I loaded in the diffuse and image texture, and I just selected the normal base footage that I originally tracked here. Once you drag that onto the background, you can use this to sort of match up the lighting and everything better. So you can see the ungraded versus what we have here. So to make this more dull, I actually went in and added a custom LUT to my Octane camera, and I used one of these Rec 709 to LUT conversion LUT. So let's render this out and bring it back into After Effects. All right guys, and then back within After Effects, in your project bin, you just right click, import multiple files, navigate to the folder that you saved that I exported from C4D. So you just select the first, import. You're gonna get this sequence here. Now, for some reason, it always imports it at 30 frames per second. So what you need to do is right click, go to interpret footage main. And if your main footage is anything other than 30, you can see mine was 23.976. Just type that in there. That way it'll match everything correctly. So other than that, what I did was actually just add a bit of color correction. So in my effect controls, you can see I just added a little bit of curves and brightness and contrast, and just some very subtle little adjustments here to try and match it with the shoe next to it. I just bumped the blues up a tiny bit. And then if you press play, you can see it's perfectly matched within our scene. So if you guys did enjoy any of the tricks in this tutorial, please leave a like. It helps me a huge amount with boosting this video within the YouTube algorithm. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you in the next one.